America. Good afternoon to you, and welcome to our At Ease program. Got some great news for you. I have some interest in this program. I've been going it alone. I know that it looks like we've had a cast of thousands working on this program from week to week, but I've got some help. And our director of the 6 and 10 o'clock news, Joey Ford, who is reputed to be one of the best directors in the entire St. Louis area, is putting together a program right now. We're going to deal with the blue laws in the state of Missouri, and that program's coming up in about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, and we'll have more information on that in 2 weeks on our next broadcast. But today we are going to talk about money, the green bills that you and I carry around in our back pockets and in our purses, and we're going to talk with Merrill Jenkins, who describes himself as a monetary realist. A man, correct me if I'm wrong, who really doesn't have a good deal of formal education, but it has been through a lifelong experience in this area. And one of the most interesting things about Mr. Jenkins is that he does not, again, correct me if I'm wrong, pay taxes.
Oh, I pay taxes, but I'm not required to pay what is called an income tax. No one is required.
Set me straight here. How do you do this? What taxes do you pay, and what taxes?
Well, we all pay taxes, excise taxes, sales taxes, things of this sort.
But you don't fill out 1040s.
No. Cannot fill that out anymore because that would be violating my Fifth Amendment guarantees.
The IRS must be awfully interested in you because of that.
No, they send me letters that this is a final response, Mr. Jenkins. We don't think that you should ask for all of your income tax to be returned to you. You see, I've asked them to return all of my income tax since 1968.
And that was before you wised up and discovered that...
Yes, I'd been filing all along, not realizing that it was a thoroughly voluntary act on one part, and secondly, that any requirement for filing had been eliminated as of June of 68. There's no way that anyone can figure a tax liability in the absence of a thing called a dollar. And we don't have any.
What about people that we hear about who are put away for tax evasion?
If you check very, very carefully into the case, you will find that the media says that they were prosecuted and convicted of willful failure to file. That is not correct. Checking into it, you will find it was willful failure to file a complete return or willful failure to file a correct
Well, normally
return.
now, in most, when I have reported on those cases, I have to say that we've really not even gotten into that kind of specific language. But usually what we say is they've been convicted of failing to pay taxes. Now, or tax evasion is the usual coin.
You see, unless you fill out a form.
In other words, you're telling me if you fill out a 1040 and file it, then don't send them any money.
No. Then you have involved yourself in the situation of income tax. You have accepted that there is such a
liability
thing and that you are responsible for it.
So you're not even recognizing income tax.
Well, I cannot. It doesn't exist. The fact that their statutes define a thing called gross income as that income. Now, if I defined a green door as being a door painted green, you would suddenly see that I was not defining a door. Now, there isn't any such thing as income. If you go into their statutes, you find that income is somehow mysteriously supposed to have come out of something you've done. But the statutes specifically say that it does not come out of your capital or out of the increase in value of any of your investments. Well, then where does it come from?
Well, do you pay a capital gains tax if you sell something?
But you cannot make a gain today. The Federal Reserve note that we all accept as being money does not transfer the ownership of anything. It has not been funded. See, George Washington in 1789 told us that if ever again we went to an unfunded paper, we would be committing fraud upon each other.
In other words, you're saying that
this is
that should be redeemable for gold or silver.
Well, when you deposited the silver coin originally and got the silver certificate, the silver coin you deposited funded the paper. And the paper
What happened to the coin then?
Well, the coin was there to be redeemed by the paper at any time.
It just sat in a vault.
That's right. Now,
And
but
now
it was available for redemption.
Now, wait a minute. We've gotten away from taxes here.
Well, I want to explain
All right.
that the tax has to be a gain, the income gain. And you asked about a gain. Now,
Right.
if I receive this for something that I've done, some
You buy a house
labor.
and you sell it 3 years later and make a
No,
profit.
let's talk with one note for a minute. It's much easier. Say I got this note for mowing someone's lawn.
Okay.
What did I get for mowing the
But that
lawn?
would be an income as opposed to capital gain.
No, this is not any income. I didn't receive the ownership of anything. All I've got is a piece of paper. That's not the money, and it's not a transfer of ownership of anything. It's Supreme Court last year in February '77 held down that even a piece of paper that is redeemable is not payment as such when you receive it. Now, if I mowed the lawn and got this piece of paper, I don't have anything yet. I don't know what I mowed the lawn for. But if I take this piece of paper to the store,
goods.
right? If I take this to the store and get a jar of jam with it, then I know that I mowed the lawn for the jar of jam, and that's barter. And that's an even exchange, value for value. Where's the gain? Where's the income? IRS cannot explain that.
But if you buy something and 2 or 3 years later sell it for more of those pieces of paper than you paid for, you've gained in those pieces of paper.
No,
and
the labor
some of that paper?
The labor I expended to hold it and to store it that period of time is simply the return for my labor. That's even exchange again.
And have they tried to prosecute you?
No, sir. They just tell me to stop writing them letters. I write them letters and I ask them to explain these things. How can this be? You see, we accept this as being currency. We accept it as being money. We accept it as being a dollar. We accept it as being a note.
Now, let me ask you.
Definition, it's none of these.
Okay, fine. Now, you're carrying that.
Mm-hmm.
And you live in a society where that piece of paper with a lot of green ink on it can be exchanged for things.
That's right. But only if
and
I
do
commit
you use
fraud.
it? Do you use these papers?
I have to either beg, borrow, or steal by fraud. By giving these to somebody, knowing that they're non-redeemable, I give them to someone and I commit fraud. Now that's why it says legal tender on it, because this is counterfeit. In all sense of the word, it's counterfeit. Now then, the Legal Tender Act makes it allowable for me to offer this counterfeit, to tender it, to legally tender it. Because Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 6 of the Constitution says, there shall be provision for the punishment of counterfeiters. All right, if I pass this and it's counterfeit, and there wasn't a legal tender law.
How can the government be guilty of counterfeit?
Well, because they can counterfeit legally. If you're arraigned for counterfeiting this today...
Wait a minute, that's a contradiction in terms, because counterfeiting is illegal.
Oh, no. Today, if you counterfeit this and you're arraigned before a federal commissioner, the charge is illegal counterfeiting. Illegal counterfeiting.
Not just counterfeiting?
Oh, no. Illegal counterfeiting.
The description, the word counterfeit means false. Fake.
That's right. This is counterfeit. But this is legal
to counterfeit a painting, right?
Yes. But see, I have clippings from newspapers and things that I've saved over many years, and I have a clipping showing and reading the story where the person who counterfeited the bonds of the United States were convicted for illegal counterfeiting, not counterfeiting per se.
What do you think would happen let's say in April? I mean, I almost hate to do this, but what is the blueprint? If I do what you do, if some of the guys standing around in here do what you do, and a whole bunch of other people out there do what you're doing, what's going to happen?
Nothing. The government would just probably spend more than it spent before. You see, the income tax...
But it wouldn't have this money from tax...
Well, where does it get the billions of dollars it spends every year that it doesn't take in taxes? Where does it get this deficit?
Well, it borrows on the future, and we get a deficit budget, right?
Give a little thought. How do you go about spending a deficit?
It's borrowed money. It's like I bought a house
it's not.
way beyond what I had in my pockets, and I've borrowed a lot of those, and I owe the bank those pieces of paper.
Well, would it surprise you to find that 10 people can sit around a table and create $14 billion by writing the number on a piece of paper and then argue over who gets to spend it? That's been done. The money that we have today is created out of nothing, simply by writing numbers in a book. Now, there are 14,700 banks in the United States who create money and issue this piece of paper to represent those numbers that they create.
You're talking about the Federal Reserve.
Well, the 14,700 commercial banks that are members of the Federal
let me try to. Your concern at this point seems to be that paper not having the proper words. In other words, it says
No,
Federal Reserve.
may I show it concisely?
Well, wait, let me just see if I can, so that I can understand this a little bit better. If I write to you, if I take this piece of paper and I write on it, Mr. Jenkins, I owe you $1 million, and I sign it and I give it to you, what is that worth?
Nothing. Nothing in reality, because there is no such thing as a dollar. If you wanted to take it up with me in court, you could prove that there's no such thing as a dollar, and therefore the paper is uncollectible. And this is the position I placed the IRS in. You have to earn $750 to have a tax liability. Show me a dollar, and I'll be very happy to comply with your laws. Now,
what if they said, in other words, would they be all right with you if they said you have to earn 750 Federal Reserve notes?
Yes.
Then you'd pay Federal Reserve note taxes.
If they'll put that
it's
in
a
writing,
semantical argument almost.
Yes, but see, that's just the point. We think this is a dollar, and it is not. That's the point. We have been hoodwinked.
Isn't that just kind of a generic term that really means, I mean, what if they call them bucks? People call them bucks, greenbacks.
Yes, but you see, again, when you had the silver certificate, remember?
Right.
All right. This silver coin was on deposit in the bank.
I remember those from Nevada.
And you could withdraw that with the silver certificate.
Yes.
All right. Now, the silver certificate at that time, was that the money, or was the silver coin the money? Is the hat check the hat? You have to realize the silver coin was there. This was the money,
right,
and the piece of paper was the receipt with which you could redeem the money.
But well,
now what's there today?
But in the state of Nevada, if I had some silver dollars,
right,
and somebody standing next to me had a silver certificate,
right,
then there would be the ability for myself and that individual to spend 2 units.
Right. You had a 50% reserve system under those conditions, right. If you had a silver coin and you could spend it, and you had the receipt for that silver coin and you could spend it, then you had 2 spending units where you only had 1 unit of money. That's a 50% reserve system. This is what Lincoln created back in 1860s. That's right. And when we started
that was okay with you?
Well, when the Federal Reserve System was founded in 1913, they started with a 40% reserve system. Now, Abbott and Costello made a fortune out of making a skit out of that, 1 for you and 2 for me. What the people didn't realize was at that point in time, the people owned the gold and silver coin which they were using in the marketplace. They owned it. It was theirs. Now the government went to a 40% reserve system and named a monetary authority, the Federal Reserve. Now, when you deposited a gold coin...
Did they do that legally?
Well, you can call it legally. They did it on the 23rd of December when most of the congressmen were home, and they had just a few congressmen in Washington, and they railroaded this thing through. And Wilson signed the bill, and a year later denounced himself for having signed it. He said, unwittingly, I have ruined my country. He knew what he had done. Now, when they went to the 40% reserve system, and you or I or anyone else turned in a gold coin, they created 1 gold certificate for that gold coin and 1.5 Federal Reserve notes. So they had 2.5 claim checks for the 1 gold coin. 1 went to the depositor, and 1.5 was kept by the bank, plus the gold coin. In 20 years...
So what is it now?
Well, now we don't have any reserve, any redemption at all. No, this is zero. This has no redemptive power at all, unless you want to call the 3% copper nickel coinage redemption. And that's only 3% of parity. Now, the other 97% is a loss to you. And I've asked the IRS, every time they issue one of these notes, the people take a loss of 97%. Now, under what statute or by what stretch of the imagination does a 97% loss become income to the one from whom it is taken?
If we're not talking about a ferrous material like gold, silver, something like that, can these Federal Reserve notes be a reflection of some other worth like real estate?
No, you have
or a piece of a company known as stock?
We are in the same position today as they were when the Continental dollar collapsed in 1789. We're back in that same position. Now, in 1779, the average congressman felt, why should I vote to burden...
But of course, if a congressman were here, he would tell you that, of course, there are tremendous safeguards against that kind of dollar collapse. as much as there is against the
We've
stock
done
market
exactly
collapse.
what they did with just a little sequential change. They issued paper to be redeemed by silver later. We've taken paper that was redeemable with silver. We've removed the silver and left the paper sitting out there.
And isn't all this rooted, though, this has all been brought about by inflation?
No, this is inflation per se.
That is the result of inflation.
No, this is it.
This is inflation.
Yes, by definition, if you go to the dictionary and you look up the word inflation, Webster says it is a sharp and sudden increase in the amount of money and credit which causes rising prices. The economist tells you rising prices is inflation. That leaves inflation both its own cause and effect. That's confusion.
Right.
Let's clear it up.
Well,
At the time that Webster wrote the book, remember that money was the metal, and the credit was represented by paper.
But before that, it was sacks of grain and beans, and before that, it was beads and pieces of bone, and before that, it was arrowheads. So
let's talk about
what difference does it make? What really represents the mode of exchange?
What makes a difference is what represents that. I asked you before, the silver certificate redeems silver. This is a Federal Reserve note. What does it redeem?
But it's as if it's as if there is a third party involved here.
No, we have a system today whereby this represents monetized debt. This was a speech given by a former president of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, Darrell R. Francis, in the House of Representatives before the House Banking and Currency Committee on July 18, 1974, saying that we have gone to monetize debt and there's no benefit to society to be derived from that. We now call debt money. We call debt money. Now, that allows no way to pay off a debt. If debt becomes money, there's no way to pay off a debt. Now, they say that debt has two faces. That if I owe it to you, that's an asset to you, but to me, it's a debt. How can debt be assets? Yet they publish books on that basis. Now, the way it is done is by fooling us in our minds to accept debt as being money. And I can demonstrate that with these two coins, if you'd like me to do it.
I would, but let me ask you something before we get... If my lifelong career and endeavor is doing what I do here at Channel 5, and that's worth something, and they, probably not much, and they give me some of these, actually they don't even give me the Federal Reserve notes, they give me something printed out over a few blocks away on a machine, and then I can take that in and never even having these in my hand, deposit it in a bank, and that helps me, that enables me to translate what I do here into a mortgage payoff. And I have real value in that I have real estate. Now, what's wrong with that?
Okay. What's wrong with it is that you are playing in a gigantic confidence game. You have the confidence that at some future time you will be able to take those numbers in your checkbook, write a check, and get something for it. Or that you will be able to get something for this piece of paper at some future time.
I am getting something for it.
All right. But you see, again, I said it's confidence in the future. Now, let me explain. We know that we're heading for a German-style collapse. I know that. A lot of other people know it. Some people don't. But let me explain why. If you were using production as the medium of exchange, if to use any medium of exchange, it had to be produced quality, worth, product. If it had to be, then we couldn't have a purchasing power exceeding 100% of what was produced. 100% of what was produced would be the total we could exchange.
Sure.
That is correct. But today we have purchasing power many millions of times the amount of goods produced in a given single day.
That's because of the confidence we're buying on the future.
We're buying confidence by funding the paper money with our production and saving these things with the confidence that they have value. I'd rather save this knowing that its value cannot be done away with than to save this and know that its value can be reduced at any time.
What is the value? That's you have a real silver dollar there.
That is right.
Okay.
It's a silver coin. It's $1 of silver.
How much will you sell me that for?
That would cost you today at least 5 to 6 to 8 of these.
And that's called inflation.
That's
Some
right.
guy, I was in the supermarket today, he gave me this thing, I was walking out. Prices, I haven't even read this thing yet, but it's very, so it's standard sort of stuff. Low price car, 1977, $5,000. 1987, $17,700. The year 2001, your low-priced small car, I guess you could buy a Pinto,
Well,
if they still make them, for $105,000.
These Federal Reserve notes.
Right.
Not dollars.
But by that same comparison,
well, let's look at
what's
it a
wrong
different
with
way.
inflation?
All right, you're accepting this
as
being
an IOU.
as a unit of value.
No, not as an IOU.
Well,
as a translation of my. In other words, if I work for you,
the value of this as opposed to this, the
right.
change. Okay, let's take an ounce of gold. It's different. It's from anything
I understand
else.
that there's nowhere near the gold to ever back up any of these.
Oh, there's all the gold we'd ever need. If you only had a cupful, it'd be enough to back all the currency in the world.
Come on.
That's a fact. Oh, that's a fact. Absolutely, sir. Because, see, gold is infinitely divisible. Its price, quote, would be very high. But one cup of gold could back all the currencies in the world.
Well, that's inflation at work, though.
No. We must talk about parities. If you took 1 ounce of gold in 1933, when gold was $20.67 an ounce,
don't you wish you had
if
a lot
you
of that?
bought bread with it, okay, an ounce of gold would have bought you 300 loaves of bread in 1933.
Right.
An ounce of gold will buy you 300 loaves of bread today. Its parity hasn't changed. What has changed is that this has depreciated because this is no longer back. Now, when a piece of paper could redeem a silver coin, it traded in the marketplace at the value of that silver coin. When the maximum amount of anything you can get for this today by redemption is 3% of parity in the form of copper nickel, that's what it trades at, the value of copper nickel.
You and I have been sitting here somewhat talking in what I think you're sort of making a lot of sense to me, but in a way I'm sure that we're going in circles to some extent. What do you think should happen then on this hypothetical gauge here of a 5,000 car, 10 years later being $17,000 and 2001 being $105,000? What is the answer before our half hour slips away?
Okay.
What are you going to do?
The answer is
still going to be a car is a car is a car.
No, the answer is to correct the situation just as they had to do with the continental dollar. We must put the Federal Reserve System and the 14,700 commercial banks through a bankruptcy proceedings. At the same time that
what's that going to do to me?
Well, at the same time, we're going to reintroduce a new redeemable currency. We introduce a redeemable currency at the same time that we put the banks through a bankruptcy proceedings. Now, what that does for all the people who hold these things is they are now able to buy the title to wealth that they pledged to get these back from the banking system.
What happens to the bank?
Well, the banking system just loses title to the wealth that we produced and they got the title to for nothing. After all,
so the banks are still going to exist?
Well, sure. The same banks.
So you're saying this could be painless?
Painless. Literally painless for the banks.
And you would start paying tax?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, sir. As long as they'd go to constitutional taxation. You see, constitutional taxation is not income tax. Constitutional taxation is taxation by the numbers. This was the reason for the census and everything else. According to Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, the cost of operating government is to be divided into the number of adult population, and each one pays the same amount. That's the way taxes are supposed to be done in this country. Income tax is unlawful, unconstitutional, therefore it's voluntary. You have to volunteer to do it. See? And that's why.
So as long as you don't volunteer, you're
in the clear. You're in the clear. Absolutely. But you must know how to present the proper founding for that. I would not advocate anyone refusing to pay
our viewers
until they
shouldn't
know
just
what
decide not to file a 1040.
That's right. I had to not only decide not to file any anymore, but go back and explain to the IRS
that you wanted your refund.
I want the refunds.
You don't want refunds in
Oh, yes, I do. Because you see, when we go to the bankruptcy proceedings, I need the evidence of having been robbed. Anyone who owns this today was robbed, you see? And I want that evidence to show so that I can bid for and get back the title to wealth which was taken from me when they issued this to me.
Tell me this. What do you see as the realistic likelihood of what you suggest happening?
Well, a few years ago, I wouldn't have given you a wooden nickel for my chances of making it, but now it's looking better and better as we go along. More and more
important
people.
Do you know Jarvis out in California?
Yes, I believe that was, well, I shouldn't say it, but it's a backfire. It's a situation whereby they do something to take away from the real
Have
important
you
thing.
talked with him? I mean, do you
No,
guys?
but I've talked with Mr. Schiff and other people. But Jarvis, I believe, is a backfire, something started by government to sap off the strength of the people who otherwise would fight the real issue. See, give the people something to look at. Did you wonder how all of a sudden this thing went across the country like wildfire? Yet the people in Colorado haven't been paying property taxes for 10 years because the state says that it must be paid in gold and silver coin. And there's a great many people out there simply wrote the state and said, give me authorization to pay in these things. Give me authorization without recourse to pay this way. And the state would not do it, so they don't pay their
Well,
property taxes.
very interesting. Merrill Jenkins, I want to thank you very much. The world's only certified
Monetary realist.
monetary realist. Maybe in our parting shot here, we can see the button on your lapel here. I want to thank you so much for coming by, and we'll have more on Joey Ford's endeavor, which will be coming up, I think, in about a month. Should be really exciting, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Can we see this thing?